Welcome to the sixth class in the Yoga Sutra study series of the second chapter called Sādhana Pādaḥ. This chapter, as I had mentioned, is divided into two portions. Just to recap what we've studied, the first portion builds a foundation for this eight-limbed practice or the eight-portion practice of yoga called the Ashtanga Yoga, the famous Ashtanga Yoga. So the first portion lays the foundation. It says why the kleshas as the root cause of suffering across lifetimes. It's deep imprints in our sukshma shariram, the subtle body, which even after the fall of this gross body, it transmigrates and takes different births. And this is what's called the law of the karma. So these imprints, the samskaras and the karmas, they carry across through lifetimes. Then we saw that the real you is the Purusha, which is beyond all this. So the samskaras and all that belong to the subtle body. And our confusion is that we not just identify with the subtle body or the mind, we all the way with the gross body, which lasts only for 80 to 100 years. Then Patanjali talks about liberation, the escape from this cycle. And in the second portion, we are seeing the 8-portion practice, Ashta Anga. And we saw a brief overview of Yamas and Niyamas. Now we are looking into Yamas in detail. So Yama literally means restraint, Niyama means observance. In the context in which it is used as, Yamas are used as external discipline. That is why Ahimsa, Satya, Asteya, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha, all these things which are Ahimsa is the first Yama, non-violence. Then Ahimsa Satya is speaking the truth. Asteya, not stealing. Then Brahmacharya, like sexual restraint or not squandering your precious energy. And finally, it is aparigraha, not hoarding. So there are a lot of negations. So it is ahimsa means non-violence. Aparigraha means non-hoarding. So asteya means non-stealing. So these are with respect to the external world. And in the Niyamas, we saw it Shaucha, Santosha, Tapas, Swadhyaya, Ishvara, Pranidhana. Shaucha is cleanliness, Santosha is contentment, Tapas, austerity, Swadhyaya, study of the scriptures leading to the self, and Ishvara Pranidhana, surrender to the divine. These are all internal observances. Purity, your content and state of mind, all those are internal observances. So we are now in Yamas, and we saw the first Yama, which is Ahimsa. Now we will go into the second Yama. Satya pratishtayam kriya palashrayatvam. When Satya, truthfulness, is established, the words of one established in truthfulness bear fruit. So this is talked about as a siddhi. So all these, in the first Ahimsa, we saw in the presence of one who's established in Ahimsa, other beings lose their violent streak, the tendencies. So here, this is also a siddhi. So that is a siddhi. That is a power from the practice of Ahimsa. This is the power from the practice of Satya, that is always established in truthfulness. This is also a siddhi. When a practitioner is firmly established in truthfulness, their words become so potent that whatever they say becomes a reality. Fruit of action follows their words. So Vachaspati Mishra especially says that the yogi's speech is always from a reflection of the eternal truth. The universe, so much so that the universe itself begins to conform to the yogi's speech. He emphasizes that this power must be used with extreme caution. The yogi's words, even if spoken casually, cannot fail to come true. This is a true yogi. That is why many advanced yogis, they maintain silence. They don't unnecessarily talk. to prevent unintended consequences of their potent speech. They can change the law of how things, there's a flow, right? Destiny, they can change the course. So they apparently don't talk much. Okay. Now there is a story from the Mahabharata. So this is a famous story. The story is when Yudhishthira speaks a half-truth. So this illustrates the power of Satya. The physical weight of a single lie, it has huge consequences. So Yudhishthira is the eldest Pandava. He's the son of Yama or Dharmaraja. So he is called Dharmaputra because Dharma, righteousness. Yama is very fair. Even the punishment or the good thing turning you to Naraka, that is the hell, or to heavens, he does this very fairly. So he's known for his righteousness. So Yudhishthira is called Dharmaputra, the son of Dharma, who is Yama. Okay. So Yudhishthira was known as a Satyavadi, speaker of truth. It was said that he was so firmly established in truthfulness, his chariot never touched the ground. It was always hovering 4 inches above the earth. Okay. This was a physical manifestation of his truth force. However, during the battle with Dronacharya, Krishna realized that Dronacharya, their teacher, could only be defeated if he gave up his weapons, the weapons that Dronacharya was wielding, in grief. To achieve this, Krishna hatched a plan. And Krishna then, Dronacharya's son was named Ashwatthama. And it so happened in this army, there was an elephant by the name Ashwatthama. So Krishna got that elephant and he asked Bhima to kill it with his mace, and Bhima killed it immediately. And then he told Yudhishthira to tell Drona that Ashwatthama is dead. Because the one thing that Dronacharya cannot bear is the death of his son. Okay, he was so attached to his son. So Krishna now tells Yudhishthira, announce to Dronacharya, your teacher, that Ashwatthama is dead. And Yudhishthira, of course, you can tell the truth, but do it in this way. So the famous word is Ashwatthama hataha, means Ashwatthama is dead. After that, Yudhishthira says Kunjaraha, which means elephant, the elephant. Ashwatthama, the elephant, is dead. So the way he says is Ashwatthama is dead, the elephant. So when he says the elephant, Krishna blows his conch. That's what you see him doing here. And that's Dronacharya way back in the picture. So when that happened, the chariot on which Yudhishthira was sitting dropped to the ground and touched the dust like any ordinary vehicle. So what it shows is it's a reminder that established in Satya requires absolute purity. Even a slight manipulation of the truth causes the celestial power associated with the word to vanish instantly. Okay, so then there is also the Vak Siddhi. So there in the mythology, there are often these boons given. So when a rishi says, may this happen to you, it'll end up happening. And they can also pronounce curses. And last time we discussed the rishi who's known for giving curses is Durvasa. So there is a very famous story it actually comes in the Mahabharata, but then Kalidasa takes it and makes it very, very, very beautiful. Okay, and that is the story of Shakuntala. It is one of the most beloved and profound epics of ancient India. So Kalidasa takes this and makes it into a play. It is called Abhijnana Shakuntalam. The Abhijnana means recognition of Shakuntala. We'll see why it's called that. So the reason I'm telling the story is here, Durvasa, as usual, comes and pronounces a curse. Now, you might wonder, this is a topic for a separate discussion. Why would a rishi who's established in the calmness of the mind, because a yogi is supposed to be possessed of a calm mind, why would such a person get angry, have no control, and give curses like this? To know that, you have to understand the bigger context. So when there was injustice on the earth, the devas prayed to Shiva to unleash his aggressive form. And this aggressive form was, Shiva came and destroyed a lot of the bad entities. And this aggressive form, it was scorching for everybody. So it was transferred into a seed, and through that was born Durvasa. So the more angry he gets, the more powerful he becomes. So, and his curses are also done for a reason. It's he knows when to utter a curse and when not to. So it also carves the destiny and teaches the devas a lesson. So all those the things it teaches. In this case, it is Abhijnata Shakuntalam. Abhijnana means knowing again. Abhi means again. Jnanam means knowing. So this means recognizing. Okay. So this again is to show the power of speech of these great people. But the story itself is, it's a nice story, but there's only a portion where the speech power is illustrated. That is through Durvasa's curse. So I'll go through this. It's a long story, and it's also extremely famous. And I'll go through it very quickly, see if I can do that quickly. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So we saw the story of Vishwamitra. Remember Vishwamitra we saw in Prasuptatanu Vichinnodharanam Avidya Kshetram Uttaresham. Avidya is the highest of the kleshas, and all these kleshas, sometimes they can be dormant. So Vishwamitra was performing penances, and then Indra sends Menaka. So this is Menaka, this is Vishwamitra, to distract him, and he loses control over his meditation, and he falls in love with her, and they have a baby girl, and he lived with her for 11 years. So the baby girl was, they have a beautiful baby girl. So Shakuntala's origin was very extraordinary. So because her father was the great sage Vishwamitra, and the mother was the celestial nymph Menaka. Vishwamitra, being captivated by Menaka's beauty, and from their union was born a beautiful daughter. Menaka, having completed her divine mission, she just came to distract him, and that she's just a celestial nymph. She doesn't have any attachment or anything. She returned to the heavens. Vishwamitra now was deeply remorseful over losing his spiritual merits. He abandoned the little baby girl, and he returned to his austerities. This infant girl, left alone in the forest, was protected by a bunch of Shakuntala Pakshi, which is that's why she was called Shakuntala, because it was protected by a bunch of birds. They're called Shakuntala Pakshi. So she was given the name Shakuntala. And what happened was, once a rishi called Rishi Kanva, he was a great rishi, great renunciation, known for his renunciation, and he had a hermitage on the banks of Malini River. He discovered her, and because she was protected by these Shakuntala Pakshi, she was given the name Shakuntala by him. He adopted her and raised her with boundless affection. She grew up to be a paragon of beauty, virtue, and innate connection with nature. She could talk to all the animals. Then one day there was a king by the name Dushyanta. So Dushyanta he's one of the ancestors of the Pandavas, Puru dynasty. He was engaged in a great hunt, and he chased. Then he comes across the hermitage. He thought, okay, I'll pay my respects to Rishi Kanva. So he comes into the hermitage, but the Rishi was away. He was on travels. At that time, he saw Shakuntala collecting some fruits with two close companions, Anasuya and Priyambala. They welcomed the king with traditional hospitality. The moment Dushyanta saw Shakuntala, he fell in love with her because she was so beautiful. Shakuntala too felt a strange, overwhelming attraction for the noble king. Dushyanta, and then later he discovered her noble lineage, because a king can only marry somebody from a noble lineage usually. So he thought it'll be a fit match, and they were so much in love with one another that they got married without the traditional rites of a marriage, because it's called a Gandharva Vyavahara, where traditional rites don't apply, because it is like a celestial. They're celestials. For them, the rules are all separate. So they just married without the need for complex rituals or even asking elders. So the marriage, and after for a few days, Dushyanta lived in this hermitage, and then he had to go back to Ayodhya, his kingdom. At the departure, Shakuntala was very distraught. So to reassure her, he gave her his ring. That is, as a king, the signet ring, they call it. It has the emblem of the kingdom, everything in it. So he gave her the ring. And he said he would promise to send an escort of ministers to bring her back in a royal style. Then he departed, and finally, Shakuntala becomes pregnant. Now comes the portion. What happened was, she was just lost in thought about the baby, about Dushyanta, everything. One day, sage Durvasa arrived at the ashram, and he's angry sage, so he was demanding hospitality. Shakuntala, being pregnant, she was lost in a deep trance. She was in love with Dushyanta, waiting for him to come, all that, and she failed to hear his arrival, and she failed to offer him water and a seat. Perceiving this oversight as a direct insult born of arrogance, Durvasa was enraged and he cursed her. So here, curse was, in your pride, you're lost in thoughts of another, that you failed to honor me, a distinguished guest. Therefore, the one of whom you are thinking shall completely forget you, just as a drunken man forgets his past actions. Even if you try to remind, that person won't remember. So having uttered these dreadful words of power, Durvasa stormed away. He just left. And Shakuntala's friends, however, they witnessed everything. So Shakuntala was still lost in her own world. They went and pleaded to Durvasa. Durvasa said he cannot change the curse, but he said the curse would end and memory would return when Dushyanta saw a significant token of remembrance. So then finally, after all that, Kanva comes back. He, with his divine vision, he knew everything that had happened, and he said, okay, you're a queen, so you have to go to the kingdom. So he sent her along with others to go to Dushyanta. So accompanied by a few trustworthy attendants from the ashram and the sage Shamgarava, and so with them, Shakuntala set out on a long journey to Ayodhya. Then, when Shakuntala arrives at Ayodhya, Dushyanta doesn't recognize her. So the power of Durvasa's Vak Siddhi, this power of speech, was in full effect. Dushyanta was, in fact, he was saying, you're trying to cheat me by saying all this. What proof do you have? And at the time, she was trying to see the ring that he had given, but she couldn't find it. It happened that while crossing the river and performing her morning ablutions, which they do the puja and all that in the river, the ring had slipped off her finger into the water. A fish had immediately swallowed it, and without that, she had no proof. And Dushyanta publicly rejected her, so she was so grief-stricken. At that time, she was just lying on the floor crying. At that time, a blinding celestial light appeared, and her mother Menaka descended from heaven, and she takes her with her to heaven. And what happens? Shakuntala lives in the celestial hermitage of another rishi called Maricha in the heavens. So Maricha, sage Maricha, the heavens. So she lives in that ashram, and she gives birth to a son whom she named Sarva Damana. Damanam means to control. It means he who can control everybody. Later, he becomes to be called Bharata. Okay, so this Bharata is different from the other Bharata that we saw. The other story of the other Bharata who becomes a deer in the next life. Does anybody remember that story? Yes, no? Yeah.
Yes.
So that Bharata is different. And some people think the reason India is called Bharat is because of this king. Some people think it is from the Jada Bharata, that Bharata, the deer, king deer, and Jada Bharata. That so this he would Sarva Damana would later be called Bharata. Back in Ayodhya, Dushyanta was very restless. At that time, a fisherman was arrested because he was trying to sell a very precious ring in the market. And the guards brought him before the king. The fisherman explained he caught a fish in the river. Upon cutting it open, he found the ring inside. And the moment he looked at the ring, the curse of Durvasa was broken. So then he was grief-stricken that he had done such a thing, and he was overcome with immense grief, guilt, and remorse. He publicly acknowledged his mistake and declared a period of mourning in the entire kingdom. Okay, so that's that story. Now, the last portion of the story, there was a war in the heavens between Indra and the Asuras, the Devas and the Asuras. Indra needed some help. Dushyanta was a great king, very skilled king. So Dushyanta called for his help. So, Indra called for Dushyanta's help, and Dushyanta goes to the heavens to assist Indra. And at the time, after he finishes the war successfully and helps Indra win, he was walking in the heavens, and then he goes to the hermitage of Rishi Maricha. There he sees a boy, and this was no ordinary boy. This boy was wrestling with a lion cub, and so the king was just there's something so attractive about the boy that the king goes toward the boy and asked what his name was and everything. Now, the boy has a thread given to him by Rishi Maricha for his protection, because the boy was very, he's very adventurous. He can go and meet other people, and he didn't, Rishi Maricha didn't want him to get kidnapped. So if anybody comes and touches the boy, that thread would become a snake and bite that person, unless it is the boy's parents or Rishi Maricha himself. So when the Marisha comes and touches the boy, nothing happened. When Dushyanta comes and touches the boy, nothing happens to the boy. So everybody around was just shocked, because they knew it could only be the boy's father. That's the only male who, when he touches the boy, the snake won't appear. So everybody says, okay, you are the boy's father. And then Dushyanta finally Shakuntala comes, Dushyanta falls at her feet and asks for apology. And they are reunited. Rishi Maricha blesses them, and they go back to earth and rule the kingdom for a long time, very happily after that. Okay, so that is the story of the power of the Vak Siddhi. Sometimes it can be good, sometimes it can be a curse, but that is the story. This is anyway a famous story. I thought I'll tell it in this context. Okay, next is the Asteya. Asteya means non-stealing. Asteya pratishtayam sarvaratnopasthanam. Sarvaratna upasthanam. Upasthanam means approach. When a person is established in non-stealing, all the jewels come to that person. Okay, what is the stealing? Of course, most people, we don't steal, but Asteya is applied to action, speech, and even thought. Non-stealing in action is physical. It's not taking physical objects without permission, not engaging in fraud, manipulation, or unlawful business practices, including tax. Non-stealing in speech and time. Plagiarism, stealing ideas or intellectual property. Tardiness, that is essentially stealing another person's time. And conversational dominance, not allowing others to speak, stealing others' speech. And finally, non-stealing in thought, mental. Envy and jealousy, mental longing for someone else's success, positions, or qualities is considered the seed of theft. It implies a belief that you lack something and that it belongs to you rather than the other person. So this is Asteya. The connotation of Asteya is that one can interpret this literally as well as figuratively. Asteya literally means not taking, not stealing, but the figurative interpretation is not taking more from others in nature than one needs. So the metaphoric interpretation is the inner treasures like a calm mind, etc., that arise only in a mind freed from greed. Okay, it's very, in this context, very similar to aparigraha, non-hoarding. We'll see that too. Okay, next comes brahmacharya. Brahmacharya pratishtayam bhirya labha. When one is established in brahmacharya, one obtains vigor. So this is an important one. Brahmacharya, charati means to walk. Brahmacharati means to walk in the path of Brahman, the ultimate reality underlying all phenomena. Brahman is the consciousness. That consciousness shines in us, and it's called the Atma. Okay, that is also called the Purusha. So that is Brahman. Walking in the path of Brahman means walking in absolute consciousness. It is interpreted, so in the context in which it is used, is interpreted as restraint in sex, or not celibacy, but restraint in sex. Celibacy means not thinking about, even thinking sexual thoughts. This is, the reason is, squandering energy, both sexual and other, leads to loss of vigor. And the sexual energy is the most potent form of energy because it causes another life to be born. Okay, in common people, energy is dissipated through the senses, leading to a weak mind and fragile body. That's why for a lot of yogic merits, brahmacharya needs to be established. Brahmachari is one who practices restraint. That person transforms this gross energy into a subtle energy called ojas. That's why they have the radiance. Without this accumulated energy, the mind is too dull to maintain the intense concentration required for samadhi, says Swami Hariharananda. And Vachaspati Mishra emphasizes that the strength is what allows a teacher to transfer the spiritual power or instructions to a disciple effectively. So there is this question that's asked these days: why do we need teachers? Everything can be transmitted using AI. AI is a great teacher. Some people are debating even colleges will become obsolete because AI can teach everything. That is true to a certain extent, but when you learn from a teacher what you get is their tapobalam, the austerity that they've gotten through years of yogic practice, that is being transferred. Okay, so that virya, without this virya, the words lack the weight and power to transform. The teacher is transforming something to the listener. That is missed. Okay. And so today we are having a lot of stories. Another famous story is that of Bhishma. So Bhishma, it's called Bhishma Vrata. So the story of Bhishma. Let's see the story of Bhishma. Okay. So Bhishma is known, the name means the one who took a terrible woe. The name Bhishma literally translates to the terrible. Bhima means it's formidable, terrible or formidable. It is the name of a birth. It's not the name of a birth. It's a title earned through a terrible or fearsome woe. His name originally was Deva Vrata. He is the vow of the Vratam, vow of the gods. That's it's called. And this was the vow that Bhishma took is such a terrible vow, Bhishma Pratignya. So we'll see what that is. Okay, so let me. So Bhishma's vow. It's a tale of curses, love, and a kingdom's fate. So this is what happens. Once upon a time, long before the Mahabharata war, there lived celestial beings called the Vasus. There are 8 of them. They were wandering through a beautiful forest so they, like, celestial beings also have vacation. So, and they come to vacation on earth. So they were wandering through the earth and they came upon Vasishta's hermitage. So what does Vasishta have? What is the famous thing that Vasishta have? Anybody wants to say? What is Vasishta known for? A very famous thing that he, possession that he had. Anjana, Anu, Amy?
The Kamadhenu?
Yeah, Kamadhenu cow. So, and one of the Vasu's wives was immediately captivated by Kamadhenu's cow. Kamadhenu gives whatever, it's a grantor, Kamadhenu. A grantor of Dhenu means grantor, Kama is desire, grantor of desires. So Vasishta was using it to feed all the people. So you would get food, she would give, magically she would give food, and this is the cow which came during the churning of the ocean. So one of the Vasu's wives begged her husband. Her husband was called Prabhasa, literally means one who's radiant, to steal the cow for her. Prabhasa, unable to refuse her, agreed, and with the help of the 7 other Vasus, took Kamadhenu away. When Vasishta came, he discovered the theft. With his divine insight, he knew who stole, and he pronounced a curse on them. He cursed that all of them to be born as mortals on earth, enduring the trials and tribulations of human life. See, human life is full of problems. So the Vasus realized their mistake, and they came to him, gave the cow back, and pleaded for the sage's mercy. Seeing their genuine remorse, Vasishta, he says, I can't change the curse, but I can soften it. He decreed that the 7 Vasus who had merely assisted in the theft would be liberated from their human form almost instantly, immediately after birth in the earth. However, Prabhasa, the protagonist, who actually stole the cow, he was the master planner, he is destined to endure a long and challenging life among men. He would see generations come and go. He would see all kinds of wicked, evil things. Sage added a softening touch, though. Prabhasa would become one of the most illustrious and virtuous men of his time. It is this very Prabhasa who takes birth as Devavrata, the boy who would later be known as Bhishma. Now, in the kingdom of Hastinapura, what happens is one day there was a great king, and the king's name was Shantanu. he was walking along the river Ganga, and he sees a woman of exquisite beauty. He fell in love, and he asked who she was. The woman revealed that she was none other than river goddess Ganga herself, who had taken human form. He asked if she would marry him. She agreed, but on one condition: you must never question my actions, whatever they may be. The moment you ask me why, I will leave you. Captivated by her allure, he immediately accepted, and they were married. Over time, Ganga bore Shantanu 7 sons, one after the other. And each time after a child was born, she would take it and drown it in the river. And he was, the king Shantanu, he was so overwhelmed, but he couldn't ask. Finally, the time came for the 8th baby, and she was trying to take it into the water, and he couldn't bear it. He rushed and he said, "Stop, please, why are you doing that?" And then she reminded him, "Look, I told you not to question me. Now that you've questioned, I'm going to leave you. I'm going to take the child with me, but don't worry, I'm not going to drown the child. I will raise him to be a good boy, a great person. And when the time comes when he's a teenager, I will bring him to you and give him, and you can raise him to be a king." So, and so she also said, she explained the curse of Vasishta to Shantanu, and then she departs. And true to the thing, what she said, she brings the boy at the right time and gives the boy to the king. Now, years passed. One day, the king was walking on the banks of a river. He wanted to cross the river, and there was a fisherwoman. So the fisherwoman, her name was Satyavati, and she smelled very, very nice. She was called, she got a boon from Parashara, who's Vyasa's father. So Parashara also, he liked her, and they bore a child who would become Vyasa. And she asked Parashara for one request. She always smelled of fish. She was called Matsya Gandhi. So, and she said, "Can I smell nice?" And he agreed, and he gave her a boon. Parashara gave her a boon, and she came to be called Matsya Gandhi. She smelled so nice. So when the king approached this fisherwoman, she was just captivated by the nice fragrance emanating from her. And he fell in love with her, and he asked if she would marry him. Satyavati said, "You have to go ask my father." So the king approached the father, and the father said, "Look, I will only let you marry my daughter if the child, the son, the eldest son born to my daughter would become the king, and not your other son, Devavrata." So the king, of course, he was so attached to Devavrata, he couldn't say no. So he was in despair. As seeing his father in such grief, this young man, he was now a very young man, Devavrata. He asks his father, and the father tells him the story. Then he says, "Don't worry, father, I will give up my claim to the kingdom." And he walked to the fisherman's home, and there this is where the fisherman is there, and Satyavati is behind. So he goes to the home, and he takes a terrible vow. He says, "From this time onward, I, the son of Ganga, Devavrata, with the sky, earth, sky, and all 4 directions as my witness, vow that I will remain celibate for my entire life. In this life, I will not marry, I will live without a lineage, and I will die without a lineage. This is my unwavering vow. Never shall I marry, nor shall I ever father a child, thereby eliminating any future claim for my descendants to the throne of Hastinapura." That time the celestial beings showered flowers upon him. A voice cried out from the heavens, calling, Bhishma, Bhishma, the formidable one whose woe is truly terrible. From that day onward, Devavrata became Bhishma, the famous, he was one of the most powerful and famous person, man who sacrificed his birthright, his lineage, his happiness, all for the sake of his father's happiness and ultimately the peace of the kingdom. So, and of course, after that, Satyavati marries Shantanu, and there's all the Pandava, Dhritarashtra, Pandu, and then finally the Pandavas are born. So that shows the power of Brahmacharya. Okay. Then non-greed. Aparigrahastairye janma katam ta sambodha. When non-covetousness is established, the complete knowledge of how one's life came out to be due to the past karmas is gained. Stairye means upon firmly established. Janma katanta. Janma is birth. Katanta means the how and why. Kataha, how and why. The nature of the circumstances. Sambodha means complete knowledge. Vachaspati Mishra says that possessiveness, aparigraha is non-greed. Parigraha is greed or possessiveness. It's a form of external attachment that anchors the consciousness strictly to the current body and its needs. By severing the ties to material objects, the yogi severs the ego anchor, and the mind is no longer preoccupied with mind. It expands to perceive the samskaras of previous lives that are stored in the mind. Okay, now in the Buddha Charita, that is the legends of the Buddha is said to have gained knowledge of all his past births in on the night of his enlightenment. Okay, so this he describes his night of enlightenment in 3 parts. The Buddha said, when my concentrated body, when my concentrated mind was thus purified, bright, unblemished, rid of imperfection, malleable, wieldy, steady, and attained to imperturbability, this is what happened. The first watch, he calls it, the 3 watches in that night of enlightenment. The first watch is from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. Knowledge of past lives. Purva Anushruti Jnanam. The direct knowledge correlates to the aparigraha discussion. The Buddha turned his mind to remembering his own past. I recollected, he says, my manifold lives, 1 birth, 2 births, 5, 10, 100, thousands of births, many cycles of cosmic contraction and expansion. There I had such and such a name. I belonged to such and such a clan. I had such and such an experience. Such was my food. Such was my experience of pleasure and pleasure and pain. Such the end of my life. Passing away from that state, I re-arose there. There too, I had such a name. So he encounters the whole thing. A lot of this you will find in the Jataka tales. He realized the impermanence of his own identity. The I thought, the one that we think is solid, the I form, he says it's so fluid, it has changed millions of times. He broke his attachment to the current personality. So that is aparigraha. So we've seen the yamas. Now we will look into the niyamas in detail. So niyamas are shaucha, cleanliness, santosha, contentment, tapaha, austerity, swadhyaya, study of the scriptures that reveal the knowledge of the self, and Ishvara pranidhana, surrender to Ishvara or devotion to Ishvara. First is shaucha, cleanliness. Shauchat swangajugupsa parairasam sargaha. So shauchat means from the practice of purity, purification of one's body. It's both internal and external. disinterest in it arises. Okay, let's see what it means. Swa anga, for one's own body, you get disinterest. So you think your body is so nice and everything. It doesn't mean not taking care of the body. This excessive attachment with one's own body becomes detached. And parai rasam sargaha, with others. Okay, asamsargaha, with parai, paraira, asamsargaha, with non-contact, non-association, cessation of intercourse that arises. So cessation of union, intercourse, contact with others develop, because once you start purifying your body, you know how impure it had been, and you lose this magic grip that, oh, I have to look so good, or you're attached to somebody because you're fascinated by their beauty. All that goes away. The yogi realizes that body is constantly generating impurities. No matter how much you wash it, it begins to sweat, excrete, and decay. The result, because of this, yogi stops identifying with the body as a pure or divine thing. Attachment, the narcissism to the body, is broken. Seeing the inherent purity of one's own body, the desire for sexual contact or physical intimacy, parair asamsargaha, that's what's called, naturally fades away. Then, due to cleanliness, what comes? Sattva shuddhi saumanasya ekagrendriya jaya atma darshana yogyatva cha. Purification of the mind, cheerfulness, one-pointedness, complete control over the senses, fitness to see the self arises. So finally, atma darshana yogyatvam. Atma darshana yogyatvam means fitness to, finally the mind is so calm, the fitness to see the self, it arises. Remember, the calm mind, you see the reflection of the moon, that arises. In the 4th chapter also, when it says, when all these distractions of the mind ceases, tada viveka nimnam kaivalya pragparam chittam, the mind becomes discriminating and inclines heavily towards freedom. Because when the distraction ceases, the mind ceases to identify with Prakriti and turns in towards the Purusha. There's another story of the famous Tulsidas. Tulsidas was a great saint who lived maybe 1,000 years ago. And he composed a lot of bhajans, very well known. So this is a good example of this excessive attachment. So he was married, and he was very attached to his wife. They were young, and so Goswami Tulsidas, he was so attached to his wife. He always wanted to be with his wife. He was so fond of her. Then there is this incident. His wife, however, she was very pious lady, very wise lady. And once what happened was that his wife went to see her parents. So she went to a different village. Tulsidas couldn't endure the separation. He always wanted to be with her. He liked her company and everything. So he set out at night to find her. Then a terrible storm was raging. The river was flooded and dangerous. Blinded by lust and attachment, moha, Tulsidas, he wanted to cross it desperately. So he thought he found a log of wood floating, and he clung on to it. Later, and he managed to swim across, used this as a buoy to swim across. But when he got close to the river bank, he realized it was a bloating corpse. Then he finally goes to the in-laws house, but the gates were locked, and he thought, okay, he'll climb a tree. Looked like some vines were hanging, so he thought he'll catch one vine, go up, but that was a snake, and he's just scared. And somehow he finally gets into the home, and he climbs through the window, and he proudly, like a hero, he comes in front of her when she was sleeping. And then she was just, instead of expecting her to come and hug him for his bravery, she was just disgusted with the entire thing. He burst into, his wife's name was Ratnavali, and he was dripping wet, triumphant, expecting her to be pleased by his devotion. Instead, Ratnavali was shocked and ashamed of his obsession. She spoke the words that would act as purification for his mind. Shaucha. My body is just a bag of flesh, bones, blood, and mucus. It is covered in skin. But inside is full of filth. Eventually it will rot. If you had even half of this intense love for Lord Rama, whose supreme purity, instead of this perishable bag of leather, you would have crossed the ocean of samsara by now. The words acted like a lightning bolt. Tulsidas saw the reality of the body. Swanga Jugupsa, he looked at himself, a man who had hugged a corpse, climbed pulled a snake just to touch another human body, and he felt a profound revulsion of his own lust. Parai Rasam Sargaha, the glamour of his wife's physical form vanished. He no longer saw her as an object of enjoyment, but as a guru who had opened his eyes. So that is the story of Tulsidas. Okay. All right. Then Santosha, contentment. Santoshat anuttama sukhalabha. From contentment with one's own positions, supreme joy is gained. Anuttama means supreme. Anuttama sukhalabha. Supreme joy, labha, is gained. Vyasa defines the nature of this happiness. He argues that what the world typically calls happiness is actually a temporary relief from craving. True happiness is cessation of thirst. The fire analogy, Swami Hariharananda explains that desire is like fire. Remember that Yayati story when the father asked the son to give up his youth so he can experience and enjoy life, and also the story of Shaubari, the rishi who's meditating inside the water, but when he sees the fish, he gets the desire and he gets married to 50 beautiful princesses, but he was still not happy. So feeding desire with objects of pleasure does not extinguish it. It only makes it burn brighter and hotter. He defines unhappiness as mental restlessness. When you want something, the mind ripples and agitates. When you get it, there's a brief moment of peace, but then the mind agitates for the next thing. Santosha is the deliberate refusal to let the mind ripple with the new demands. It is the state of saying, this is enough. So when the mind stops rippling, natural joy of the sattva guna shines through. So that is Santosha. Okay. All right. We will stop here.